Burnout is chronic, prolonged stress. And I would dare to say that each and everyone has had chronic, prolonged stress over the last several years. And so it's extra important for leaders to check in on their own mental health and well-being, and also be aware that part of their role as a supervisor is to pay attention to the mental health and well-being of their team.
I am Damon Lemby, and this is the Learn It All podcast, the show for leaders who know that lifelong learning can be your ultimate advantage. In a moment, I'm going to be joined by Joyce Marter. So Joyce is a psychotherapist, well-known keynote speaker, and she's the author of The Financial Mindset Fix. And for more than 25 years, Joyce has helped leaders and organizations strengthen their mental well-being, navigate stress and burnout, and also help people overcome those limiting beliefs they have around money. Her journey is a very powerful example of humility, resilience, and having the courage to ask for help. In our conversation, Joyce is going to break down for us why self-worth shouldn't be considered soft. It's actually the foundation for net worth. How transparency and vulnerability can deepen trust and strengthen your culture. What every leader needs to look for when it comes to spotting burnout amongst her team, and how to move from scarcity to abundance personally, financially, and professionally. So Joyce, so many leaders really want to show up for their team. But the truth of the matter is that we're overwhelmed ourselves. So how is it possible to show up for others when we're barely hanging on ourselves?
That's a great question. And it's something I'm seeing across organizations across the country these days. You're right. Everyone's dealing with chronic uncertainty and change. And as leaders, you're a human as well, but yet you're also supporting your teams. And so it's extra important to promote mental well-being. So really prioritizing your own mental health and practicing mindfulness and self-care, accessing support, and making sure that you are refilling your cup so that you have bandwidth to deal with everything that's going on in the world these days.
Yeah, and I think I've heard you say it too. It's like when you're on an airplane, put your oxygen mask on first before others, right? At the end of the day.
Absolutely. It sounds selfish, but it's necessary. Otherwise, we're of no use to anybody else.
Yeah, I totally agree. So for leaders out there, especially new managers who maybe don't have any self-care practices to start with, and you can't go from A to Z, do you have one self-care kind of easy exercise people can start with?
Yes, absolutely. So to have a morning practice, set your alarm maybe 10 minutes early. And instead of looking at your phone first thing in the morning, don't look at your news or social media or your work emails. Take a moment to set an intention for the day, to practice a short meditation or deep breathing, or a short yoga or stretching practice, or journal. Even taking a moment to sit outside and be in nature, a moment to be present. That's going to set your day up for success rather than overwhelming your nervous system with looking at the news and the email. That just floods your body with cortisol and sets you up for stress for the rest of the day.
I love it. I mean, there's really nothing worse these days than just jumping right into your email and then checking out the news channels with everything that's going on. I've gotten into the habit myself of getting up around 5:30 and just going and sitting outside and having a cup of coffee just to kind of reset and get ready for the day.
I love that. A mindful moment. And it really does change the trajectory of your whole day. And it's extra important when we're just overwhelmed and going at such a rapid rate the rest of the day. And with regard to news, I think it's really important to be informed, obviously. So maybe before going to work, checking the news, being aware of what's going on in the world, but not having it on all day. So making sure that you're closing out news tabs, silencing notifications so that you're not getting bombarded with traumatic news that really it can cause secondary trauma and distraction throughout the workday. And then look at the news again in the evening, but not too close to bedtime because that is going to impair your sleep.
Now, what advice do you have for somebody that if they do fall into that and they get some traumatic news in regard to what's going on in the world right at the beginning of the day?
Yes, that is very challenging. And I think really honoring your emotions and wrapping yourself with self-compassion and honoring any fear or anger or worry that you might have, and taking a moment to breathe into the body. Mindfulness is supported by so much research, and the breath ties together the mind, the body, and the spirit. So if we can control the breath, if we can deepen and slow the breath, we will calm the mind and the body. And we can also cultivate some healthy detachment or healthy emotional separation. So by being able to zoom out and see the big picture, kind of detach and separate a little bit from the news that's going on so that you're able to function. So in some ways, compartmentalizing it and setting it aside, imagining that you're doing a body scan and you're taking any of the stress or yuck or catastrophic or fear-based thoughts, and you're setting them aside so that your energy and your mind and body are clear for the day.
That's great advice. I want to take it back a step and get our audience who may not be familiar with you a little bit more familiar. Can you share a little bit about your journey and what's got you here?
Absolutely. So I am a licensed psychotherapist and I have been practicing for over 25 years. I'm super passionate about removing the shame and stigma around mental health and promoting awareness and access to care. I also founded, built, and sold a large mental health company in the Chicago area that was in 3 states. And I started that with $500, 50,000 of student loans, made 1,000 mistakes, and ended up in cash flow hell. So the bigger we got, the more money was outstanding in insurance. And wasn't able to pay my staff and my rent on time and was suffering panic attacks and insomnia. And I became really interested in the psychology of money and realized in my own therapy, actually, that a lot of my money mindset had to do with my father, who was born during the Great Depression, and that I sort of unconsciously recreated what was familiar in my family of origin, where things looked great on the outside, but on the inside, there was a lot of money anxiety. So I have become a keynote speaker and corporate trainer because by applying tools from psychology to my money mindset, I was able to save my company along with the help of many others and successfully exit that in 2017 for more than I would have ever imagined making in a lifetime. So I'm really interested in what I call mental wealth, which is the intersection between mental health and finance.
And we're going to get deeper on that, but I want to stay with the cash flow hell for a second because it brings me back to 1999 and 2000, where I was in the exact same position. And for me, I had cash flow hell was having to call my family to cover money when it came to payroll. What was that like for you? And how did you work your way through it?
It was massively stressful. And I dealt with so much shame and anxiety, fear. And again, it was negatively impacting my mental health, my marriage, and my health. And so what ended up happening was my business partner resigned. She left. She said, I can't handle this stress and I'm out. And luckily, we had a business dissolution agreement. And so we went through kind of a business divorce, and I took responsibility for the company, even though it had so much debt. I believed in the mission. I believed in the staff. We owed it to the clients. So like a captain of a ship, I took responsibility, and it was really difficult, but it taught me one of the most important lessons, and that's the lesson of humility. Instead of telling people that everything was okay and wearing the mask of ego, I was broken open and shared openly with my staff, my leadership, my family, my friends, even my neighbors, that I was in cash flow hell and I needed help. And help came out of the woodwork. So I learned that it's so much more important to, as a leader, instead of trying to do everything yourself, I was thinking that that was the more helpful thing to do. It actually was a huge disservice to my organization and also to the staff because I had such smart, talented staff. And once I was open and transparent with them, they had brilliant ideas to improve the company. And all of us is smarter than just one of us. And so when I opened myself up to receiving that support, it helped the whole organization heal. And I had a neighbor that said, Joyce, it sounds like you need a business valuation. And I'm business minded, but I wasn't business trained. And I said, what do you mean? My company's not worth anything. And he said, well, talk to my CPA. I'm sure he can help you. And I was crying when I handed Tim my QuickBooks file. And I thought he was going to tell me I was going to have to file bankruptcy. But he said, Joyce, it's okay. I'm here to help. I'll call you in a couple of days. And he called me and he said, are you sitting down? And I said, yeah. I thought he was going to say, you're going to have to file bankruptcy. And he said, your business is worth a 7-figure multiple. And I said, what are you talking about? I owe hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he said, your business model works. You truly are having a cash flow problem, and I can help you get the proper lending. So my business partner walked away from a 7-figure business by looking at the lack, by looking at the stress and the fear and uncertainty. And I don't blame her. It was horrible. But by sticking with it and facing that discomfort, I realized I was sitting on a golden bench, and I was able to work on improving the business over the course of the next 7 years, and then sold it for a 7-figure multiple and an 8-figure exit. Something I would have never thought possible with a master's degree in counseling psychology.
Well, first of all, I think we should all find our own version of Tim, because he's awesome.
Yes, he
Right?
is.
And at one point for our listeners, I think that you need to understand is when you're going through hard times like this, you don't have to go at it alone, especially if your partner abandons you or whatever happens. Reach out to your network, be humble, and just say, hey, I need some help. And like you said, people will come out of the woodworks to help you. And I think it's just so important that we don't have to go at this alone. One question I have is, though, where did it come from, this drive to want to stick through and not give up?
Well, I like to think that I'm a person of integrity, and I take my responsibilities very seriously. And I also put so much of my life into that business. I really felt like it was my baby, and I was not ready to give up on that. And I'm really mission driven. I knew that the business was doing good in the world. We were providing insurance-friendly counseling to thousands of clients that needed it. And so I knew it was something much bigger than myself. My staff was depending on it for their mortgages and supporting their families. And I wouldn't have been able to live with myself if I had let them down. And so each day, it didn't immediately get fixed. Tim gave me that great news, but we still were in a cash flow pickle. And it took a while to get the proper lending. And even then, we had to make some dramatic changes. And some of that involved letting people go, restructuring, changing some of our overhead, and becoming a little bit more lean. And those were all difficult decisions and difficult conversations that I needed to have. And each day we were still eking out of that cash flow. I remember my accountant, Shelley, would say, we paid the phone bill today, baby steps. And we had to just have a sense of humor and move our way through it one day at a time. And it was very stressful, but I would say within a year and a half, it got a lot better.
I like what you said there. Take baby steps. You can't go from A to Z and fix everything all at once. And if you just have little milestones and little wins and you celebrate those, that helps bring momentum. And to the best of your ability, try not to take yourself so seriously and just have some fun with it, as hard as it is. And I do that when I just try to feel like I'm giving it my best. Let's see what happens. So here's a question I have for you. Back in the beginning of COVID, my company learned it was very difficult. We didn't know if we would survive. And I had a outsourced CRO at the time, and I was very transparent and vulnerable with our team around where we were at numbers wise and everything. And he pulled me aside and said, hey, that's great that you're sharing it, but aren't you afraid that being so vulnerable, people are just going to want to jump ship right away. How would you respond to a question like that?
I think transparency and honesty builds trust, and people can pick up when things feel off, and it can create paranoia. So I think being transparent is, it's more honest, it's the higher road, it's difficult. And yes, it could scare some employees, but if you sort of frame it as, I really need your help and we're in this together and I'm committed to getting through it, and how can we collaborate to, save the company and make it through these difficult times? My staff, I ended up asking them if everybody would agree to be paid 2 weeks later than I had a lot of independent contractors. And I realized that a payroll cycle was $100,000 at that time. And so if everybody could wait to be paid 2 weeks, that would give me cash flow. And people were like, I'd much rather do that than lose my job that I love. And so collectively, I had to share, like, we were in a really scary place, but collectively, everybody was able to contribute to saving the organization.
No, that's wonderful, and it's great that you had the courage to have that conversation with them, right? And you get it out there and give them the opportunity to make the choice, and it makes them feel like they're more part of something. I want to switch gears a little bit. We have a lot of middle managers, which I think is one of the toughest things possible out there these days. 5 years ago they had about 5 reports. Now they have up to 15 or 16 sometimes. How do you go about, and you really want to take care of your people as a middle manager, how do you go about noticing when there's red flags for them when it comes to dealing with your employees, when it comes to dealing with burnout?
Well, burnout is chronic, prolonged stress. And I would dare to say that each and everyone has had chronic, prolonged stress over the last several years. And so when I speak to my client companies, and again, I speak across industry and give about 60 presentations per year. So I'm reaching over 100,000 people. And I always assess people on a mental health continuum that is between being in crisis or struggling or just surviving to thriving and excelling. And most people right now are falling in struggling or surviving, with some in crisis. And so it's extra important for leaders to check in on their own mental health and well-being, and also be aware that part of their role as a supervisor is to pay attention to the mental health and well-being of their team. So one of my most popular trainings and keynotes is mental health awareness in the workplace and mental health triage for leaders and supervisors. So I'm teaching leaders and supervisors about the common signs of mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, substance misuse, or addiction, and how to recognize those and how to remove the stigma around mental health. We all have mental health just like we have physical health. No shame, no stigma. And I believe that seeing a therapist is like going to the dentist or the doctor. And so having a routine mental fitness practice of self-care, mindfulness, going to see a counselor, or utilizing your EAP for a wellness tune-up, and some positive mental health counseling or coaching is healthy and proactive. And I think sometimes people think if they talk about mental health at work, that that's not professional, but it is absolutely necessary. And it can be life-changing and even life-saving. Unfortunately, a lot of the companies that hire me after they've lost employees to suicide. And this is a very serious issue. And so mental health first aid is how to check in with your staff and say, how are you doing? And how to notice if people are calling in sick a lot, they're showing up late, they're looking differently, they're not putting themselves together, they're looking a little disheveled. Maybe they're reporting changes in sleep or appetite. Maybe they've put on a bunch of weight, or they're sharing that there's some challenges going on at home. And according to the APA, financial stress and the economy are top stressors for Americans. And these stressors are even higher for parents and for younger adults, so millennials and Gen Z. So middle managers may be supervising some younger team members, and the younger team members are dealing with a lot of mental health stressors. So checking in, asking how people are doing, learning about your mental health benefits in your company. Many companies have an EAP, which is free and confidential and provides short-term mental health counseling and referral services. And counseling and therapy is covered by your insurance, just like major medical. So these are managerial skills. And so a lot of companies teach leaders how to, be a mental health advocate in the workplace. And in certain industries, this is even more important because statistically, the rates are really higher in, for example, construction. There's the rate of suicide is alarmingly high.
So let's say that you have some employees or some high performers and you see them showing up late for work or calling in sick more often, or you just tell that something's wrong. How do you have, let's say, a brave conversation to address that with them? Especially, Joyce, if you say, hey, how you doing? And they're like, fine, but something else is going on there. How do you dig deeper to have that conversation?
Well, if you have the opportunity to meet in person or at least over video conferencing, to say to them like, hey, I'd like to check in with you. When are you free? Let's, schedule a half-hour meeting or an hour. And make sure that you are not distracted, that you have privacy, that you have a confidential space, and that you give that person your complete attention and your presence, that you're really looking at them and that your affect and your body language is warm and open and kind and compassionate, and checking in with them and allowing there to be some silence and some awkward pauses and not feeling the need to fill that in. So you can say to someone, for example, I've noticed that you seem not like yourself lately. I noticed that you haven't been having lunch with all of us like you usually do, or you haven't been going out after work with the group, and you've been kind of isolating yourself. And I am concerned about you. I care about you. And how are you? And if people kind of put up a mask and say, oh, I'm fine, and they're maybe defensive or guarded, it helps to share about your own mental health, to say, well, gosh, we've all been overworked, and I know that I'm not sleeping very well. I've been kind of irritable lately, and it would be understandable if you were feeling overwhelmed. So when we normalize those feelings, it kind of gives people space to then come out and share. And so just being a good human, asking them about their family and their loved ones and how things are going, how they're feeling on the job, letting them know that you care, and then saying to them, like, we have these resources that are available to you through the EAP or through our insurance, or some companies offer mindfulness in the workplace programming and benefits like Calm and Headspace to help people have a meditation practice and mindfulness practice. So talking about those resources that are available. And your job is not to be a therapist, and it is not to diagnose someone, nor should you. But you can say what you notice. I notice it's difficult for you to get organized in the morning and that you're having some challenges with time management. And what I'm sort of getting at is that this could be an ADHD situation. And maybe if the person had a few counseling sessions, maybe they could be diagnosed and treated, and that would be life-changing for them. And so you don't want to say, I think you have ADHD, but you can say, I noticed that there's maybe cognitive overload, and maybe there are some strategies that the EAP could help you with, so that you're feeling better and functioning better at work.
And I think one thing that's important, and not only are you caring, which is super important, and you have, I'm sure, more stats on this than I do, but from a business perspective, it really helps with your engagement in your business. When people feel like, going back to what you said earlier on, if you ask them how they're doing and you're physically and mentally present and hearing what they have to say and you're building that connection, the engagement goes up and it just builds more trust across the board.
Psychological safety in the workplace is critical. And so for new managers, that is a skill to facilitate a positive rapport with your team so that they feel safe and comfortable talking to you if something's going on personally that's impairing their productivity and functioning at work. And having those check-ins, being present, being empathic, talking about their feelings, saying, it's totally understandable that you're feeling overwhelmed or that you're feeling angry and frustrated. I don't blame you one bit. And that's a completely normal response to everything that's going on. But I care about you and I'm concerned and I want to be the bridge to care.
And I want to go back and touch on a little bit. We touched on it a little bit about how they feel financially, but what you said earlier, which I know for a fact to be true, is that financial stress is a huge burden on mental wealth. So let's talk a little bit about how to address that, or if you even do address that with your team.
Absolutely. So I speak to many organizations. They bring me in to talk about financial mindset and money mindset. So I teach about the psychology of money and help people recognize if they're dealing with financial trauma or if they've survived intergenerational financial trauma that's exacerbating their scarcity mindset and money anxiety. So having people look at their families of origin and earlier life experiences and what the money messages were. And then tools to manage money anxiety. So strategies from cognitive behavioral therapy, narrative therapy, and mindfulness that we can all use to navigate those scary situations. And you and I have both been there. So it's part of the human experience and it is something that we can move through. So we want to build mental and financial resilience. And so with my book, which is the Financial Mindset Fix, I have these wheel exercises like the financial health wheel. And people assess how well they're doing in each area of the wheel, in each spoke. So each spoke is something like, are you saving and budgeting? Are you owning your worth? Are you negotiating? Are you treating yourself within your means? Are you meeting with your financial advisor? So these are all financial practices that are part of our holistic health and wellness. So having these workplace wellness trainings for managers and their teams is really supportive to the employees. And in a day where employee attraction and retention is so important, we want to make sure that people have these skills so that they can manage the stress and anxiety that they're dealing with and still function well at work.
So in your book, I believe you have, isn't it 12 mindset shifts in your book that they can do around financial wellness? Which one would you apply to somebody on your team who says, I'm in debt, I'm always in debt, and they have that limiting belief like they're never going to get out of it?
Yes. Well, you just hit the nail on the head when you said, limiting belief. But when they say, I'm always in debt or I'm going to always be in debt, that's self-fulfilling prophecy. And so according to cognitive behavioral therapy, our thoughts precede our emotions and behaviors. So if we have those self-limiting beliefs, which are rooted in a scarcity mindset, we're going to want to shift that to abundance. So abundance is one of my 12 mindsets that I think would be the most important for this person. So scarcity, and I mentioned my father dealt with that during the Great Depression, and many of us are dealing with it now, is a belief that there's not enough resources to go around. There's not enough jobs or food or gas or during the pandemic, toilet paper. And so we need to be fearful and competitive. And abundance is the belief that there's more than enough for all of us and that we can collaborate, we can be generous and share with others. And so when somebody says to themselves, I'm always going to be broke, that is their money story. And we are not just the protagonist of our money story, we can also be the author. So they're writing a story that they're always going to be broke. And guess what? If that's what they believe, that's how it's going to play out. So instead, we have to create a vision. And that's my favorite thing as a therapist. I love to mirror back to my clients everything that is unique and brilliant and amazing about them and all of their unique talents and gifts, and help them get out of their imposter syndrome and perfectionism and to silence their inner critic so that they can blossom into their highest and fullest self and align their unique gifts with the need in the world to the greatest extent possible. And so that requires abundance. It requires embracing our worth and believing that more is possible. And frankly, the world needs each of us to be our best and to shine our light brightly and share our gifts within the world so that we can be part of the greater good and create positive and lasting change.
Now, if somebody in the audience says to you, "Hey, Joyce, that all sounds great about abundance and being a positive and helping the world," do you have a specific story that you can share about how that's actually somebody's transformed from the scarcity to abundance and have had a bigger impact on the world?
Yes. Well, I'm going to share my own story from earlier on in my career. I met with my friend Steve, who invited me to coffee because he and I were both starting our own private practice. And he said, "How much money do you want to make?" And I said, "It'd be great to make $60,000 a year." And he said, "Ooh, gross. I want to make over 100." And I said, "Do you think that's possible?" And he said, "Of course that's possible." Well, that year I made 60 and Steve made well over 100. This was in the late 90s. Steve, by the way, has gone on to be on Shark Tank and Win It and on Oprah's Favorite Things. And he's created and sold many businesses. And I thought, oh my gosh, am I setting my own ceilings with self-limiting beliefs? And I realized that earlier in my career, I set different benchmarks for my earnings, and I always made that amount, but I didn't make more. I didn't realize that those goals were actually limits. And so I started doing all this woo-woo stuff, which, I don't know if everyone's going to buy into, but I certainly do, in terms of money affirmations and money mantras and visualizations. And I started listening to Louise Hay, who was a wonderful author and speaker around abundance. And she suggested imagining how much money we would welcome toward us. And I, for some reason, picked the number $2 million. I thought that would solve all my problems. And that was an asinine figure at that point. And you know what? When Tim, the CPA, called me, he said that my business was worth $2 million, which was that exact amount. So there's a lot to our thoughts creating our reality and our intentions creating our reality. And cognitive behavioral therapy and the research around that really supports it. So we need to have these mental fitness strategies and practices to reframe our thinking to really grow our life and develop mental and financial resilience.
I mean, at the end of the day, people could say it's woo or whatever they want to say. But I've always found that if you set small goals and not moonshot goals, you're never going to hit anything above what you're saying you're going to do. So you have to stretch your goals. What is another money story that you find your customers telling themselves?
Well, you sort of mentioned it when you said, I'm broke, I'm poor. That is one. I'm never going to be able to travel. I'm never going to own my own house. Those are negative beliefs that are impairing them from seeing a greater vision. Another common money story is, rooted in comparison. I'm just not that kind of person. That's not available to me. And so that's a narrative that needs to be
Like
changed.
a victim mindset, right?
Yes, that's a great point. That is a great point. And I certainly have had clients deal with that where they might say, it's the economy, it's the government, it's my boss, it's my employer, and that it's my ex, it's, my kids, and that's why my money situation is not positive. And so the number one thing we need to do is take responsibility and take the reins of our own financial life. And when we do that, we shift from an external locus of control that all of these outside variables are determining our financial situation to taking an internal locus of control where we believe that we have the power to change our financial life by managing our money different, by learning and growing, developing new skills, by negotiating our salaries and our earnings, our benefits and our bonuses, and negotiating other things in life, negotiating with for example, I negotiated with my HVAC guy the other day and saved $800. And then I went to a furniture store and negotiated and saved another $500. And that was in one weekend. So we all have the power to do these things. We just have to do the work.
I think that's really important what you're saying right there. So it's too many of us focus on the external, and what you're saying is really needs to be around the internal. And I think you have another great line, and hopefully I get this right, but self-worth precedes net worth.
Yes, absolutely. That's even better than what I say. So I might have to steal that. I would say, yes, self-worth leads to net worth. And, Susie Orman noticed that as well in her financial advising practice. She said self-worth leads to net worth, but net worth does not lead to self-worth. So I believe that we are all innately worthy and deserving of all that is good. And when we embrace our worth on that sort of essence level, meaning not our ego, or our mind's understanding of ourselves. But if you believe in mind, body, spirit, sort of the spirit or authentic self aspect of ourselves, we are all deserving. And so when we embrace that and we start relating to the world in that way, things transform. Our lives can transform, including financially.
Can you unpack a little bit more what you said a moment ago about net worth doesn't lead to self-worth?
Money does not bring happiness, and money does not make us have good self-esteem. The self-esteem comes internally. So when we can develop healthy ego, which is awareness of our strengths and our deficits, so we have humility, and we're connected to our essence, our unique light, and we communicate in a way that's assertive rather than aggressive or passive aggressive, then we demonstrate respect for ourselves and others in our communication, and we set healthy boundaries. And we teach people how to treat us with respect because we treat them with respect. And this includes financially. So I teach a lot about financial boundaries and financial communication in relationships, both at home and at work, whether it's with your partner, your kids, your boss. Having these important money conversations is really important. And when we embrace our worth, it starts to show up in our net worth, in the money that we earn and what becomes available to us. So I continue to learn and grow and put myself out there. And that dreaming big, I was at a workshop a year ago and I said, I want to write for Forbes. And my colleagues at my table were kind of laughing and they were like, well, yeah, so does everyone. And, good for you. And I'm now a contributor to Forbes because I went for it and I contacted editors and I applied and went through an interview process. And so now I have a little separate income stream for that. So we have to imagine that more is available to us.
And there's that, I don't know if it's a study or a saying that at near the end of your life, you don't think about the regrets of the mistakes you made. You regret the opportunities and chances you didn't take. And so, like you said right there, just go for it. what happens if it doesn't happen? Who cares? But, I'll put a link into your, if I could find it, or send it to me for your Forbes contribution. Another way that organizations can help their team members when it comes to financial literacy, so to speak, is to bring somebody like you in to do a workshop or classes. Can you speak a little bit about whether they bring you in or other resources they can provide to help their team members around financial success?
Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head that promoting financial literacy is so important and financial empowerment. So companies will hire speakers like myself to do corporate trainings. I do a lot over webinar as well, which is highly effective. So that can be available to all staff, regardless of location, usually over lunchtime or something like that. And so it's a way to learn these skills to better manage your finances or your mental health or your communication or your resilience. All of these skills that really are so important for leaders and supervisors. And so definitely asking HR. HR usually is in charge of that budget in terms of professional development and hiring speakers and trainers. And different employee resource groups also bring in speakers like myself. So if you've got an employee resource group for women or for the LGBTQ population in your corporation, then they might bring a particular speaker to talk on a topic that's impacting that employee group.
And when it comes to financial literacy, if you brought somebody in or you just wanted to do one workshop on it, would you recommend starting with just how to balance your own personal budget? Would that be the place to start?
Well, it really depends on the audience and what is their financial literacy at. If you obviously wouldn't do that to a group of CFOs, so it depends on the level of functioning of the population that you're working with. But I think, there's a lot of different topics that can be covered. Investment strategies is another part of financial literacy, and also the behavioral finance, the psychology of money piece is often overlooked. And I feel that money management is a little bit like healthy eating and working out, where we know we need to earn more than we spend. We need to save and invest for the future, but it's our psychology that makes it challenging. And so if we can develop healthy habits and systems of accountability, so having an accountability partner or having some programs at work where everyone does a financial fast for a week and sees what that's like and shares what they notice. Those kinds of practices can be really insight provoking.
Great. I want to shift gears one more time when it comes to mental well-being. And I'm just really curious what you're seeing out there around how AI is, and what kind of anxiety level that's creating and what to do about that.
Yes, I'm being hired very frequently to talk about AI and mental health because the number one issue is that people are afraid that their jobs are going to be replaced. And that uncertainty is massively anxiety provoking. So helping employers and leaders assure their staff and be transparent about their plans for using AI. And, if the plan is for jobs to change, then being forthright about that and kind of having a rollout that is manageable for staff to learn new skills that they may need to learn as their responsibilities shift, so that it isn't all happening at once and that they understand what the plan is that's going to better help them to manage their anxiety. So I teach a lot of the mindfulness strategies like deep breathing, box breathing, or square breathing, it's called, or guided meditations. And these are ways to basically navigate change more successfully, and how to be more mindful of your self-talk and becoming aware when you're having those fear-based and catastrophic thoughts that really fuel anxiety and depression, and shifting those to more grounding neutral thoughts and positive thoughts so that you're able to take those baby steps and navigate these changes.
There are a lot of changes, and I just want to remind everybody listening today that AI is here to stay. And it's only going to get better. So if you're not rolling up your sleeves and learning how to use AI, use some of the techniques and meditation and everything Joyce is talking about to get yourself in a space and then start learning these skills, because those are the skills that we're going to need as we move forward, both as a leadership role and also as individual contributors. Joyce, before we go, do you have one more piece of advice or feedback for our audience out there on what they can do either for themselves or to help their team members?
I think to check in on your own mental health and well-being and, ask yourself, how's your mood been lately? How have you been functioning at home and at work? How are you feeling about yourself and your self-worth? And if you're in that struggling or surviving parts of the continuum, talk to a counselor or therapist and start having these conversations with your staff. Let them know that you listen to this podcast and that you're reflecting a lot about mental health in the workplace and you want to check in and see how everyone is doing. And would they benefit from having a speaker come in and talk about mental health in the workplace? I know that people really appreciate it.
Well, in today's world, there's, I think, nothing more important than getting ahead of this and supporting each other and collaborating. And so where can our listeners connect with you at?
I'm on LinkedIn and my website is my name. So joycemarter.com, which is JoyceMarter.com.
And your book?
My book is The Financial Mindset Fix, a mental fitness program for an abundant life. And it's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Audible. So if you have a free Audible, check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been awesome. It's so very important. And listeners, what I'd like you to keep in mind is start with doing a self-audit on where you're at mentally. And from there, if you're leading a team, try to go out of your way. I know you're super busy, but be curious and just see how people are doing. And when you ask them how they're doing, be present and there for them, because at the end of the day, we all need to care for each other, especially in high tense times like this. And as I always like to say at the end of these, stay curious, keep learning. Have a great day. Joyce, you're awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Damon.
Can you put the we before the me? I have seen the pitfalls of some of our top performers, both in Vancouver and San Jose, think that their next step is the leadership track for people. And they get in.